Welcome to Monday Night Live in Lexington, you guys. Hey, Instagram.
Hello.
Hey, Facebook. And hi to Periscope. I'm going to be over here in the little corner here, so Periscope. But this is the main person that we are listening to tonight. This is Shifu Careaga of Blue Lotus Acupuncture. We have an ongoing series about the electric universe. And so tonight we're going to go into the prognostications of Immanuel Velikovsky. So, but first, let's recap and kind of go over the current science of the electric universe.
Right. Well, we live in a time, and this is really important. There's been a lot of big developments, and I'm going to hit a couple of them, but I want people to understand that more than ever, people are starting to question authoritarian stories, whether it's a textbook or, Michael Shermer goes on to Joe Rogan and he just makes blanket statements. People are starting to question that, and that's the power of the internet.
Yeah.
And that's what's really happened. So a lot of what I'm talking about tonight is actually from the past, and there is newer science and newer things, and then I'll get into the next show. But we have, in the past, I want people to remember that there are a lot of old giants of the electric and plasma universe stuff. So you have Halton Arp, who had 300 galaxies named after him. He talked about the intrinsic redshift, and you can look up these galaxies using space engines. So reminder to people on the the primer and on the Electric Universe Gateway, there's a link to space engine. And you can run it on your computer yourself and go visit these. You put in ARP212 and go to that galaxy and see it. Halton Arp was a big name.
For those of you that are first joining us and you haven't seen the other episodes, we'll leave the gateway link in the comments section for you so that you can go and start your search on that. So let me say a quick hello to some of the people that have been joining us and are getting on the stream. Hey to you, Chastity, Gary, Kyla, Tom, Veronica, Georgia Dixie, nice to see you, Melissa Begley and Lana Lorraine, Martha Theobald, one of my favorite people in the world. Kisses to you. Jill Jones, Autumn Law, Declan Howe, thanks for joining me. Linda McConnell, Floriana, nice to see you again this week. And Helen and Kathy, thanks for joining us tonight. And Jean Matthews McHatton.
Hey, everybody.
So
for example, I'm going to show people for this one thing, Halton Arp was excommunicated from they actually kicked him off of his time at the telescope. He had to move across the country and find another telescope.
But that's a recurring thing with a lot of scientists that are bringing new theories into things.
He dared to say these two were connected, this quasar and this galaxy. But you can see with your own eyes that it is clearly connected, but yet the redshifts were vastly different. Now, according to traditional science, redshift should be a matter of distance, a Doppler effect. And on redshift, all of Big Bang is penned. So if the reason why they had to is because if he brings down redshift with his theory of intrinsic redshift, then the whole emperor has no clothes.
Yes.
And that's what's happened. So anyways, you can read Halton Arp's stuff on the Electric Universe Gateway. I've got his papers. There's also people that have been ignored, big names, Irving Langmuir, Hans Alvin, James Van Allen, who the Van Allen belts of Earth are named after. So these are not small-time people. And Immanuel Velikovsky came out in that era, and he was actually friends with Albert Einstein, and he was a grand student of Freud. So
I think
that's
his era was 1920, and most of his prognostications were
in the 50s.
Out in the 50s.
Right before the space age. And this is the key point, is that everything that we're talking about, it happened before the launching of satellites, before really any kind of information. We take for granted what we know about Venus, what we know about Mars. He was making predictions, and this is the key point. He was using myth from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Persia, and he was synthesizing it into a story that he put into Worlds in Collision.
Which kind of went with his background of being not only a psychiatrist, but a psychoanalyst. So
Right, and he
did a lot of study with that.
He had a medical degree, and he also was proficient in mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that helped him out to make, he was actually quite logical, and I'll get to one of those things. So he was a friend of Einstein. He came to America to avoid World War III and began composing his works after studying all this Egyptian myth. So he didn't just start proposing it. He actually was studying these myths and started to realize that there was a synthesis of the stories. It wasn't just weirdos doing, mummification, sticking hooks up people's noses. There was something interesting going on here. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, he sent his first paper to a man named Harold Shapley, who was a Harvard astronomer. And Shapley is the one who began the vilification and turning. So now, Haltnart may have been the actual 20th century Galileo, but Immanuel Velikovsky was treated as Galileo. Mm-hmm. And that is a
in
whole
the
different
same
world.
way.
Yes, literally just ostracized. And
there are even papers that go into the intellectual battle between the two.
There are, and they call that all the Velikovsky affair. And so we're talking about everything from about 1956 through his death, 1979. Mm-hmm. And the goal of Western astronomy was to sweep him under the rug as quickly as possible.
Right.
Everybody should realize that Carl Sagan's work was primarily an exercise in getting someone credible enough to destroy him, but no one wanted to follow it up because, it's the old assuming the position. Mr. White, when did you stop beating your wife? It doesn't matter whether you actually did beat your wife. It's just, if I say you did, then everybody starts believing it.
Right.
And nobody actually followed him up. And that's why I posted that link of somebody who actually stepped through. Mm-hmm. But, listen to some of these predictions that he made. And here's where the conundrum comes from.
Okay.
So he said that Venus was incredibly hot instead of humid and wet and cool, as all the predictions were, because the science fiction of the 20s, 30s. So he came out here in the 50s and said, no, Venus will be incredibly hot because it was spit from Zeus's forehead at the red spot.
Right.
That its atmosphere would be full of hydrocarbons and the rotation of it would be slowing down. That the moon has moonquakes and water. And this is important because just a few weeks ago, they released that even more water than they originally anticipated.
Right.
And there's some strange company that's starting to mine at one of the poles. And Bright Insight, Brighter Insight on his YouTube channel, he makes the point, if they haven't been to the moon lately, then how do they know where to mine?
Exactly.
Yeah, that Mars having water also gives room for Sitchin's work and Lemieux and all this stuff about Mars. And then the Mars's canyons would be signs of electrical discharge, and the poles would have carbon and carbohydrates. And then the big ones, that there was the biggest scientific battles on Jupiter having massive radio waves. He made this prediction long before they had measured it.
Right.
And a solar magnetic field around the sun, and then the suns and planets having large electrical charges.
Which we now know to be fact.
Right. It is not only that they also have different charges, and their compositions are so radically different that it really throws a huge monkey wrench into the accretion theory. Of course, I consider the accretion theory dead, considering Venus is slowing down in its rotation, and that's finally been proven, slowing down by 6 minutes. So now we know it could not have, the solar system could not have formed in that way of everything coming together. And since TRAPPIST-1, really, accretion, of course we'll do that next time, but TRAPPIST-1 has thrown out accretion theory completely. They haven't announced this, and I want people to understand they're not going to announce it. The revolution will not be televised. So there will be instead a need to slowly rewrite the textbooks and change it to where, if you have kids in high school now and then they have kids, what their kids will be learning will be different, and it will be subtly changed.
Be totally different.
Right, and they will never admit that it was Velikovsky that started all this.
Which is sad.
Right, so Carl Sagan's response was very vindictive, very dismissive, and full of doubt, and not very specific about the actual debunkings. And so he made these statements that ruined Velikovsky's reputation, kind of crushed his spirit, crushed his, obviously, financially. He did have some hallmarks. So you can go on YouTube and you can still watch videos.
Yes,
there were about an
there's
hour-long presentations about the
a lot
Velikovsky
of
affair.
yeah. There's a lot of videos about cosmic catastrophism and the world's in collision. So there's
Yeah.
several on there that you can
Very, very many.
check out if you want to know more about Velikovsky's
Yeah,
prognostications.
that's right. And so he died in 1979.
Mhm.
His kids took over the estate. But now the Thunderbolts Project has taken up all this. Dave Talbot and Wal Thornhill. And if you watch Remembering the End of the World, which was made in the early 90s, this is actually how they came together and met each other, was for that project. And the Thunderbolts Project got started in the late 90s. And Wal Thornhill is really interesting. He continued making prognostications, specifically mostly about comet landings and different things. Also, like, does everybody remember when the comets hit Jupiter?
Yes.
So here's a conundrum.
Yes.
If those were impacts, how were the explosion clouds bigger than the Earth? So these were all comets smaller than the Earth by far.
Then they couldn't be
impacts.
Yes.
Because, and this is Wal Thornhill's point, was that they were explosions. They were not impacts, but they were actually charge interactions, and then
Yes.
it exploded outwards. So, that size of an explosion should not happen from something small. And we saw this in the Russia event with all the GoPros and people's car cameras. That small meteor should not have made an explosion that hurt so many people,
Right.
except by electric explosion.
Right.
Okay, so this is a really important, this science coming through. So, so people have stepped through. Now we can actually, you and all of us, we can all debunk Sagan here. So Venus coming from the red spot might seem ridiculous, right? But now they've actually flown over, and there is something special about the red spot. It is not a traditional storm in the way that we think of a storm. And it's, of course not, because it's been lasting for hundreds of years. That doesn't really make any sense.
That's not classic.
So there's some kind of geology underneath, and it's creating an electric field. And now we see, and I posted that video. You can go watch now in lab. They can create dust devils using just plasma, electricity, and electric fields.
And we'll leave the link in the comments. I'll just copy and paste it. It's on my Facebook timeline, but I'll go ahead and copy and paste it into the comments so that you guys can watch it as well. And I want to remind you guys, let me go back and do a little couple shout outs here. I want to remind you guys that if you have any questions on you're going to have to put them on my personal page. We have several streams going here, but I will go back and try to at least answer or link you to a solution. So shout out to Mary, Wayne, Jill, Becca, Judy, Anna Halfley. Hi, how are you? Andy, Shelley, and a special shout out to John Philip Young. Thanks for joining. Jennifer Miles, Pam Branson. Hi to you. Todd, Kitty, Liliana, Sari, and Beth. And hey to Denise and Lisa. Thanks for joining.
So some more of the debunkings that we now know. Back then Sagan didn't believe that there were collisions of planets and moons, but now the big whack theory is all over the place, and we see in the Sumerian, the collision of a body with Tiamat, and that becoming Earth and our moon, and they're talking about that. I mean, there's a discrepancy of dates and when things are quote possible, but it is not far-fetched anymore to be talking about these collisions. Of course, his first book was called Worlds in Collision.
Right.
How about the Earth and Mars's tilt being the same angle, the same degree, and there's an astrological connection. I forget the word for it, but they follow each other in a certain way, and there's an actual.
Well, they're entrained to each other.
Yeah, they're entrained to each other, which again, accretion theory would not account for at all. Now, electric universe geology is new. I mentioned briefly that in lab they are producing these structures. They can produce something that looks like Olympus Mons. They can produce Valles Marineris. They can produce even the dust devils. And
that video was very interesting.
Yes, it is absolutely. But there is even more now. There are actually mountains that when you look at them from above, and this is in the EU in the Gateway. There's a EU geology section. When you see certain mountains, they have harmonic waveforms that can only be produced by either a resonant vibration in the ground or resonant winds.
Right.
And the question is, what it looks like, actually there will be a regular mountain, and then just caked on will be these triangular form mountains that are not from water. You can look at yourself. You don't need to be a geologist to know that you're not going to have three peaks with a with a harmonic, and the man shows the actual math behind it. So you can watch that video. That's out there. So now let's see here, Martian lunar craters, right? So there's a huge problem with craters of Mars and our moon, specifically the side facing us, which is there's way too many of them that are perpendicular. Maybe more than 90% of them, maybe probably 98% of them are totally perpendicular. And then you have these craters that are here, and then they've got craters on the rim, and it's always that way. It's never a crater and then another one, laid on top. It's always that, a bigger crater and a smaller crater, or you have square craters, hexagonal craters.
So that it's patterned.
Yes, it's patterned, and it's patterned in a way that should not be from glancing blows of impact. So something striking in this direction, and the only thing that's known to do that with a repeatable method is plasma arcing in an electric field.
Which, is kind of demonstrated in that video, which we're going to leave.
That's right. To. Yeah. FD Flies, F2D Flies channel. You got chemistry in the atmospheres that doesn't make sense. So you've got, hydrocarbons. Now there's even this idea of star water. That's something that's come out new.
We could do a video just on that.
Well, I know. I tell you, the star water stuff is really fantastic because, this worry about is there going to be water or where does water come from? It might just be produced all the time, maybe even inside the planet. Falsification of the Oort cloud. So there's no more dirty snowballs. They've gone. You can watch the Symbols of an Alien Sky, Part 3. These comets don't have snow on them. And that's what we grew up on, believing that the Oort cloud was just out there, and every once in a while we would be, something hurtled us, and we'd be lucky if
ice and snow.
That's right. And
I remember that.
We're so lucky if we don't get hit by one, but actually it's not like that at all. They're electrically charged, they're rock, they're made of the same stuff as asteroids, and as they approach the sun, very often actually they get around the sun when they're going away, they cross some type of electric stream, some solar wind, and then they explode and they go away. And these highly elliptical orbits, the only thing that's different is that they're highly elliptical versus the ones that go in a circle or in a long ellipse like the asteroid belt.
Right.
I tell you, so we got comets with hydrocarbons on them. That doesn't make any sense. You've got
but isn't
fossil
I don't
fuels.
want to say hydrocarbons, but wasn't one of Velikovsky's prognostications that the comets would be carbon based?
Right. He was basically saying they're going to be made of the same material as the planets are. And he was totally vilified. And for some reason, this guy who makes up a dirty snowball theory was lauded and just kind of everyone put him on his shoulder. And even in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were saying, oh, for sure, all the water on Earth came from comets. They announced this like they had, been there. And it's not true. Okay. The Earth's water did not come from comets. Okay. It just didn't happen. In fact, you can go and watch right now. The European Space Agency produced a laughably and embarrassing beautiful CG film where they said they were going to find water. They announced it ahead of time, and there's gods, and they're manipulating all this stuff, and it's all about finding the water. And we once thought this way, and this changed everything. This is the Rosetta Stone mission, and they didn't find anything.
Wow.
Okay, they found traces of water produced when the what's being ejected in gases from the comet interacted with the solar wind would produce kind of like a snowfall, like a little dusting. Yeah. But whatever would land would evaporate away. Wow. Now they spent who knows how many millions of dollars producing this propaganda. That's not science, right? So art initiating science is the tail wagging the dog. It's not the way it should go. You can have art in science, but you can't let the art dictate the science.
Yes.
First comes the science, then the art should follow that.
Exactly.
Now we have the origins of foreign DNA. So there's your Sumerian crossover. Okay, so there's all the foreign DNAs. We'll leave that for another fun night. Okay,
nother series.
So many more. I've shared the link, and that's a 220. That's a whole book where he debunks Carl Sagan because nobody had done this. This man actually set out to go, hey, was this a fair hit or was it not a fair hit? And the entire scientific community lauded Carl Sagan for doing this. And as much as I love the pale blue dot, what science is about is repeatability. And when he started looking into the claims that Carl Sagan was making, of course, the hindsight of 30 years, Carl Sagan is the emperor with no clothes here. He's just not making any sense. He's not actually got much to support him. He said something to the effect of, basically, he said that these prognostications were just basically blind luck or weren't right at all. And Professor Hess responded this way. He said of Velikovsky, this is really interesting, 1963, "We are philosophically miles apart because basically we do not accept each other's form of reasoning or logic. I am, of course, quite convinced of your sincerity. I admire the vast fund of information you have painstakingly acquired over the years about human history. I am not to be converted to your form of reasoning. You have, after all, though, predicted that Jupiter would be a source of radio noise and that Venus would have a high surface temperature and that the sun and bodies of the solar system would have high electrical charges and several other such predictions. And conversely, I do not know of any specific prediction, Velikovsky, you made that has since been proven to be false. I suspect that the merit lies in that you have a very good basic background in natural sciences and you are quite uninhibited in the prejudices and possibly taboos which confine the thinking of most of us. Whether you're right or wrong, I believe you deserve a fair hearing." And that's about as good as a clap as you got. Well, how it's good, you're good.
Yeah.
You're just good enough. It's all because of that. It's nothing to do with what ancient people said, because the ancient people, here's the fact, they were better astronomers. They were obsessive astronomers. The Dogon proved that. Okay, in Dogon culture, if the astronomer is touched by male or female, he has to be killed.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so the people of the past, they were obsessive astronomers. The astrology was not as woo a science as it is now. It was literal. I mean, we're talking. And here's the thing that I want people to understand.
But the society lived by it, so it was more important, I think.
They were growing up under the gods. They would have felt the presence. We want to talk about Mercury going retrograde. Now it's bad enough. Imagine when you could actually see it right there.
Yes.
Okay, and Mercury, Hermes, was actually, doing something and moving about in the sky quickly, and the interaction of these in high electric field, of course, there would be much greater. Remember, people, that electric fields are 10 to the 38 times, not 38 times, but 10 to the 38 times stronger than gravity. So when these things are interchanging electric fields or plasma electric fields in particular, the forces that are acting, there would actually be noises. The so-called trumpets were literal. There would be kind of rumblings in the earth, and there would be this kind of pull. To this day, when a comet goes by Mars, or there's a conjunction where when Earth and Mars pass this close, there'll be a planet-wide dust storm on Mars. It's impossible for wind to do it, and those dust storms will last several days.
So it's electromagnetic.
Well, the field interactions are all around you right now. I mean, there's electric field between us. I almost brought with me a ring that I had used, and it was a synthetic stone, and it fried the stone. It actually cracked the stone.
Oh, wow!
Right, and that's just the electromagnetic field I can produce while I'm working as a healer. Imagine the power of living in a universe that's inundated by this much energy. Plus, you talk about the time. Not Zep Tepi, but this is after the first time. But when in the sky, Mars had saved mankind from Kali, and now they are, in some cultures, they're mating. In other cultures, she is suckling a babe because he's smaller, right? It's a smaller planet. So, depending on the culture, in the Sumeria, they were copulating, and stuff is raining down, and you've got these hydrocarbons all over the place, and people are actually fertilizing their cultures and living with it. And that lasted for a while, too. It wasn't a short time.
Right.
The time after that became a short time, and it was very chaotic. But that period of time, which was after the disappearance of Ra, and of course, as we all know, we had been switched from Kronos to Jupiter's reign. So at some point, Earth had been borrowed from Saturn's orbit to Jupiter's orbit. I know that sounds really crazy and it sounds really wild, but it is what the ancients recorded.
But that's what we're here.
Very assiduously.
Look, Monday Night Live in Lexington is supposed to be wild.
I know, it is supposed to be wild, but I want it to be real for people. And in the way that it's real, think about this. Somebody has mathematically proven, they've actually shown that the Great Conjunction was mathematically possible. And imagine your entire world was centered around the eye above you, and that eye being, Mars and Venus in the center of Kronos or Ra. And now that being that star reflecting the light from the sun, and you live in the Zep Tepi where there is no passage of time. And you judge time by the movement of that crescent. And
you're going to be watching that really close.
Yeah, you're going to be watching it really close, and you're also think of the struggles that would come when your entire pantheon falls apart. The violence that would come, the hatred of women, first of all, because Venus going from being the beautiful goddess to this Medusa, and introducing dragons and snakes and killing. And then when Mars betrays us and becomes the traitor tyrant, the scar-faced tyrant is what they called him. How would they know it's a scar-faced tyrant? So when he brings also the war upon us, and there's asteroids being slung, you can find Martian thunder rocks here, thunder eggs on Earth.
Right.
Well, there comes your Viking culture and kill or be killed. It's the Conan the Barbarian times after that, because the gods are gone. You've got, and in the Greece they invent the hedonism god. So everything just kind of crashing down. And here we are. We're just trying to figure out how to live and be as humans, when for all eternity we thought we would live under the graces of the gods. And from an evolutionary standpoint, whether people believe in evolution or not, just think about this. From an evolutionary standpoint, there is no natural reason to believe in gods. There's nothing dictated. You walk in a forest, if you don't have your mind set to the right frequency, you can be eaten by a tiger. It doesn't, or a mountain lion here in Kentucky. Right. You're not a god. Okay. So if you are an ape coming out of that, you're not just going to believe in this stuff. It has to be some basis for that.
Right.
They weren't crazy in this idea that they were just trying to understand how things work. No, they knew what electricity was. They didn't know how to make it. Right. But they knew what they talked about lightning. They talked about a thunderbolt. They knew it was powerful.
The effects of it.
That's right.
And how it interacted with their world at the time.
Right. And so you've got the deluge, the great flood, the cataclysm. Okay, and there's biblical interpretations for the cataclysm and everything. But all this stuff, now they're actually talking about this. Graham Hancock has a new video of where he as a journalist, he sees the mainstream starting to kind of wake up, but where they're missing is they still believe it was impacts that melted all of the polar ice, and it's just not likely, because if so, first of all, impacts cause cooling, and secondly, was there an impact on every piece of ice?
No.
And where did the Sahara Desert and all the belts of deserts come from?
Exactly.
So there's a huge problem with
another
impact, with the
conundrum.
impact only. Right.
So let me ask you one question.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my research on Velikovsky, they refer to him in the category of cosmic catastrophism.
Right? It's kind of a dismissive.
So what does that mean exactly?
That means he falls in a line. They've put him in a line with other people that they consider to be more or less kind of, what's that very famous prophet, that everybody likes to still quote him, but he's always partially wrong. I forget the name.
Yeah.
But he's kind of woo pseudoscience, right? Let's look at the word pseudoscience. Pseudoscience means partial science. Well, a pseudoscience would mean something you can't test in a lab, or the science is not performed completely. Like there's no repeatability. There's no, they're changing too many variables at once. Nobody's verified it. Okay, so a pseudoscience might be modern archaeology. Because you can't go back
100 years from now,
That's right. Right. So you're making these statements, and it turns out you don't know what you're talking about. Like him saying that he didn't think that the Sphinx could be built 12,000 years ago because there's no people. And then you tell him about Göbekli Tepe, and he says, "This is true." Zahi Hawass says to Graham Hancock, "I don't know what that is." Oh my! Yes, this is a big problem when you have the head of Egyptian archaeology doesn't know what Göbekli Tepe is.
Yes,
and he admits that on camera. Once again, the emperor not having clothes.
Oh my!
Yeah, that is an oh my moment. It's sort of like I mentioned in the Kentucky archaeology, the head of the Smithsonian not knowing what the Dina Hopewell culture is, and you're like, oh my God, that's the most important culture in the United States' ancient history.
Which the Gateway link has all of your information on.
And I update the news. There's a couple new ones about length
and there may be people that don't know what the Gateway is, so we might need to explain.
Yeah, well, it's just a portal of links to various things that you can learn about the electric universe. Now there's a news section, and there's also Windy TVs on there if you like to play around. It's really pretty. And there's new news, and the electric geology has actually got 2 new videos that are up there. And I also recommend watching the Sky Scholar ones, because when you have someone like Dr. Robitaille, who is a genius. Okay, his series on the thermodynamics, I didn't know where he was going with this. I'm like, oh, it's so dry. I've learned it, but it's so dry. And then he drops the bomb about black holes. You have something that's not only violating one type of perpetual motion machine, but a second order perpetual motion machine that's producing energy without any background. And you're going, oh man, and this guy, he's putting it all out there. He's just saying there's no black holes, So, and what have they found? Just within this month, they announced that they're finding collections of charges in the center of the Milky Way. It could be, you see, like if I have something as a center of mass like this, okay, but now if I bend it, the center of mass is no longer inside it.
Right.
So you can still create a center of mass in the center of the galaxy, so long as there is something there, and that's where the actual center is. You can have stars going around it. There's nothing to say that there has to be an actual object there. But the Riemann space
doesn't that kind of go with Velikovsky's
Well, it does in
theory?
that Velikovsky was saying that if you have testimony of ancient people who have no reason to lie, they've got no stock market, they've got no peer-reviewed papers, then you need to look at that testimony and then, of course, test it and see what. And then what he did was, without any rigorous astronomy himself, remember this in the 50s, he laid out certain predictions with science. Now, if any one of you or I made such a prediction, and we worked, at MIT or whatever, and at that time we were astronomers or physicists, and we had made that prediction, we would get a Nobel Prize for any one of these. And he made however many, at least 10, that he got no credit for. And in fact, retroactively, we're talking about revisionist history. I thought fake news was new. It's not. Carl Sagan was busy saying, those weren't prognostications. And it's like, well, what were they then? Because that's exactly what they were. They were predictions of things that nobody could have any clue. I mean, think about the Venus slowing down in its rotation. You could guess it was hot because it's close to the sun. I mean, he said it would be hotter than Mercury, and that turned out to be true. Yeah. How could he know that the rotation would slow down unless the ancients were right and Venus is new? So the question
he did a lot of study in that.
That's right. And
other people didn't do.
Here's the scary thing. You've got this great push for us to worry about climate change. Let me tell you something. Climate change is definitely real. There's nothing new about it. Okay, it was hotter only 1,000 years ago, and there was a temperature spike after the Younger Dryas that would put anything now to shame. Okay, just Google image search Younger Dryas on the image search. You're going to see something that's going to blow your mind. Okay, the narrative is out of control. I'm coming from 25 years, the Church of Science here. I believed hook, line, and sinker. But the simple facts are that we're not becoming like Venus. Venus is becoming like us.
Yeah. And so
Venus is new. It's a baby.
We're about out of time, but I want to have you explain Zep-Tepi.
Okay.
And then we'll go over what our next endeavor is going to be.
All right. So Zep-Tepi just means the first time. So this is referring to, it's an Egyptian word. So it refers to a time when you could say it's the Eden time, or the beginning of time. And remember that let's use just Western evolutionary science. So for 200,000 years, at least, you've had modern humans, people just as smart as you and I. And believe me, I always love it when I encounter an atheist who thinks that they're smarter than I go, there's no way you're as smart as Lao Tzu or Buddha, okay? There's just no way. Like, these people were if you've ever read the sutras, these are the most logical people you've got. They're obsessed with logic. There's a whole school of logic from ancient China. These are people who are just as smart. And for hundreds of thousands of years, they lived this way. They had no reason to draw on rocks about it. They had no need to. There was plenty of game, plenty of resources. The gods were right there. They took it for granted. They were the children of the gods. They're doing alchemy. They're learning how to live hundreds of years. If you believe in the stories of people living 200 to 500 years or 800 years. So this is Zep-Tepi, is this time when the sky, it wasn't even the same color. And this is a true thing. You can go and look this up. Most of the cultures of the world, the ancient cultures, did not have a word for blue and a word for green. They had a word for blue-green. Qing is the Chinese word. And many of the cultures, even to this day, you can go to these ancient cultures and point it out, and they won't know the difference between the two. They just call it Qing. And scientifically, plants should not have chlorophyll that is green, because green is one of the biggest wavelengths coming from the sun. So the energy in the air was actually a different color. And so you want to talk about the spirit world. If Aurora Borealis is the spirit world above, like the afterlife, think about what you're seeing on the ground, whether it's ball lightning or other things, maybe it's sprites and spirits and fairies that are floating around because they're plasmoids, and these plasmoids are moving all over the place. That is Zeptepi. It's a very interesting time. It's just different than our time. I wouldn't want to go back to it because from time to time there would be a huge electrical discharge.
Yeah.
And you look at one side of the moon and the other side, you can see the one facing Earth that's always facing Earth is the one that's been doing all the discharge because it's machined. The other side's been beaten like a pulp.
Yes.
So the one facing Earth from time to time, as they build up differential of charge, it's just a voltage. And once the permittivity is breached, boom, you got a discharge on the Earth. Maybe it's the crater in Arizona and it's a one-time discharge, or maybe it's a huge event.
Yes, and
And who wants to go back to that? I don't need that.
Tonight
Living
is
in caves, right?
the full moon, and it's also a partial lunar eclipse in Aquarius. So tonight's pretty special. A lot of you that are ultra sensitive may be a little bit overwhelmed or a little bit more emotional tonight. I will leave a link to some meditations that I did today to help soothe and calm.
That's a good idea. It's been a Yin Monday for sure.
Yes. So what we're going to do next, this is the next step in our series on the electric universe, is September the 11th, we're going to present the plasma science. And if we have time, we'll go into Project Sapphire.
We'll definitely have time. It will be a heavier science, but there will be some images. Maybe I'll bring back the plasma ball. It'll definitely be all about helping you to understand what's the difference between plasma. There's a lot of things that we've been taught to look at backwards. The side effects list for meds, those are what they do, and it's a poison, and it does anything positive is the side effect. And in the same way, you've been taught that there are 3 states of matter and plasmas over there. Actually, most of the universe is plasma, and we're lucky to have solids and gases here on this planet. So we're lucky to have solids and gases.
Okay, guys and girls, that is all we're going to do tonight. Jeez. And David, what's for dinner?
We'll be having nabe mono.
And please tell our viewing audience what the heck that is.
That is a Japanese one-pot meal.
Nabe mono.
Nabe mono.
That's tasty.
Sounds good.
You'll have pork and beef and mushrooms and greens.
All right.
Kisses from Kentucky. And we will see you next Monday is going to be the conclusion of the Shadow People series. So I will see you guys for that. Have a great evening.
Bye.